A very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Azim Premji University. We are delighted to present today's program in our series of public lectures, which are held at our two campus cities, one here in Bangalore and the other in Bhopal, every month. Public lectures are one of the ways by which the Azim Premji Foundation promotes its vision. All our public lectures, over 100 of them so far, are available on our YouTube channel, and I invite you to view them. A brief introduction to the speaker, the interlocutor. Ajay Bisaria is a strategic advisor and commentator on international affairs with a distinguished career in diplomacy, global policy, and economic strategy. He is a distinguished fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. A former Indian diplomat, Mr. Bisaria served as High Commissioner to Canada and Pakistan. I think there has not been anyone after him in Pakistan as the High Commissioner. I'll stand corrected if he corrects me. And he was also ambassador to Poland and Lithuania during a 35-year career in the Indian Foreign Service. He was also a key aide to Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee and represented India on many occasions. Ajay has degrees from St. Stephen's College, IIM Calcutta, and Princeton. His book, Anger Management, and I can assure you it's not a self-help book. His book explores India-Pakistan diplomacy and was released in 2024. Our public lectures follow a format where we have the speaker deliver their talk, and then one of my colleagues from the university engages the speaker in a short conversation. Today, it will be my senior colleague, Dr. C.K. Matthew. Dr. Matthew is a visiting faculty at Azim Premji University, an officer of the Indian Administrative Service, Rajasthan cadre. He retired as its chief secretary. Post-retirement, he worked for about 4 years as a senior fellow in the Public Affairs Center here in Bangalore, where he developed an index for the measurement of the quality of governance in the states of India. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Ajay Bisaria.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matthew, visiting professor at the Azim Premji University, Mr. Sudhish Venkatesh of the Azim Premji Foundation, friends, management of the Bangalore International Center, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Very good evening, and thank you for making the time to be here. And I'm delighted to make my first visit to the Bangalore International Center. And thank you to the Azim Premji University for making this possible. We meet at a very interesting time of geopolitical flux in a world between orders. The global community has gone through 6 months of the Trump revolution, and this revolution, of course, has challenged the global order in multiple ways. It's challenged the Euro-Atlantic order, it's challenged the trade order, it's challenged the nuclear order. We've also watched the ebbs and flows of conflicts in West Asia and in Europe. We are seeing the unfolding tariff wars and trade deals now in this very broken economic order. All these impact our South Asian neighborhood. But what we have also seen, and what is fresh in our memory, is terrorism from Pakistan in April, and in May, a very collusive, high-tech battlefield in between India and Pakistan, and a collusion that we saw between China and Pakistan in this battlefield. And even as we are headed towards some kind of rapprochement in the 5-year standoff that we had with China, we've seen this development of the last month. What it underlines is that we live in a tough neighborhood where we cannot change our neighbors, but need to be finding ways continuously of managing them and managing their behavior. With Pakistan, we have seen 4 major conflicts and the provocations of multiple acts of terrorism or jihad, starting from 1947, foundationally, in Poonch in Jammu and Kashmir, and on to last month's 2025 conflict that we saw in Pahalgam. But today's conversation is not about what you saw the wall-to-wall coverage of, which is the conflict of last month, but the attempt is to talk of the sweep of 78 years of this India-Pakistan coexistence and conflict. And what I thought I'll do is to speak about India's difficult relationship with Pakistan, drawing some stories from my book, Anger Management, that looks at the trajectory of the 78-year-old relationship through the prism of diplomacy and through the eyes of diplomats in India, in Pakistan, and elsewhere. What I'll do today is talk of 5 themes which I feel encapsulate this relationship, and then hopefully provoke you enough into a conversation on these issues. So let me state these 5 propositions up front. First, if you ask me what is the one fundamental driver of the India-Pakistan conflict, I would say it is Pakistan's continuing identity crisis. Second, this identity crisis impacts and inflames this bilateral relationship, stimulating this anger and passion that we see expressing itself often. And often the relationship is about managing that anger. Third, despite the anger and conflict, there has been space for diplomacy in this relationship, for peacemaking initiatives in this relationship. Fourth, global forces have played a role apart from in the bilateral relationship. And fifth, Pakistan policy for India now is fundamentally a counterterrorism policy. It's not a neighbourly policy, but a counterterrorism policy. So let me, kind of defend what I mean by each one of these ideas. First, the identity crisis that Pakistan faced foundationally has led to a strategic culture of persistent revisionism, and also a quest for identity, for ideology, for territory, Jammu and Kashmir, for security, the belief that India is out to get Pakistan, and also a quest for parity with India, because this is the other of India, but it seeks to be a country that is at par. So what it has done is made Pakistan into a garrison state with a structural hostility towards India. When we look at 1947 or the 1940s, we see a Pakistan that was created in quite a hurry. From the passing of the Lahore Resolution in 1940 to the creation of Pakistan within 7 to 8 years was not, in historical terms, a long period. But the identity of Pakistan never could be fully defined. The founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, died in 1948, and I've argued that he had an expertise in creating a country, but not in defining a vision of what that country would be. His first prime minister and associate, who moved also from New Delhi, was Liaquat Ali Khan, who was assassinated in 1951. And no leader of stature succeeded these two initial leaders of Pakistan. In contrast, in India, we had Nehru, who governed for 17 years. India had Patel and leaders of that stature till 1951 at least. Patel was around. India had given itself a constitution by 1950, had elections in 1952, had significant land reforms soon after. Pakistan had no such luck. It had no land reforms, no integrated political framework, no constitution for the next 25 years, effectively. The first constitution Pakistan gets is in 1973. It stops being a dominion in 1956, but that status remains only for 2 years till the coup of Ayub Khan. So what we see in Pakistan is a feudal and military elite captures power in all this foundational chaos. In 1948, India's first High Commissioner, a man called Shri Prakash, first High Commissioner to Karachi, was given the task by Nehru of going to Jinnah and asking him to surrender his homes in India because these had become enemy property. And Jinnah had homes in Mumbai and Delhi, and he had sold his property at 10 Aurangzeb Road in Delhi to his friend Ramakrishna Dalmia, who rented it to the Dutch embassy for 5,000 rupees a month. I was there for lunch last week. It's now a property of the Dutch government. The Dutch ambassador stays there. And basically, it was sold eventually for 5 lakh rupees to the Dutch government. But what Jinnah really loved was the Jinnah house or his property in Mumbai. And he pleaded with this High Commissioner. He said, tell Jawaharlal, please don't let me part with that property. Let me keep it. And so the High Commissioner was flummoxed. He said, oh, why? Do you want to go back to India? He said, of course, I want to go back to India. And he said that, he waxed eloquent about the property. He said, I built it brick by brick by brick. What beautiful verandas. It is fit only for a European family or a very refined prince. So you can't just give it away. So in the middle of an India-Pakistan war that was going on, you had the founder of Pakistan telling the Indian High Commissioner, look, I want to go back. Because Jinnah's view was, and he told the US ambassador this, that I've created this country, but we hope to be like US and Canada. We'll go back and forth. So this was Jinnah in 1948. And he hadn't really defined any great vision. He fell ill soon afterwards. In 1958, the army had taken over. Ayub Khan had launched the first coup. And the debates went on in Pakistan of who we are. Are we South Asian? No, we are not South Asian. We were founded by the first Arab in the 8th century, Muhammad Qasim. So we are actually Arab and not, or Central Asian, but certainly not South Asian. So and apart from that, there was this layer of this permanent grievance. Also, Jinnah didn't want the country to become a theocracy. On one occasion in 48, he tells the same Indian High Commissioner, Shri Prakash, that when Shri Prakash goes to Jinnah and says, why are you repeatedly calling Pakistan an Islamic state? So he said, I never said so. And this High Commissioner quotes to him something. He said, I didn't say so. And he said, maybe your Prime Minister Liaquat said so. And he said, well, you fight it out with Liaquat. I don't think we are an Islamic state. So he did not have in mind a theocratic state, but his successors took Pakistan in that direction of becoming a military theocracy. What our High Commissioner assessed is that Jinnah really wanted this to be a state where Muslims resided, but not really an Islamic state. He wanted a progressive state. So Pakistan had 3 wars with India in the first 25 years of its existence. It also had a coup every decade. And the army took over for about 10 years and basically creating a military elite that refused to cede power. Now, I would argue that the Pakistan Army's dominance, which continues to the day, is the biggest obstacle to Pakistan's own being because of the confusion it creates, and it is also an obstacle to the diplomacy. Even now, when you fast forward to 2025, on the 16th of April, a week before the Pahalgam terrorism, we had the Pakistan now Field Marshal and Islamist Army General saying in a public speech that he talked of the two-nation theory, which Jinnah had talked about. He talked about Kashmir being the jugular vein of Pakistan, which is what Jinnah had talked about. So basically, you have a new Pakistani dictator who is reinventing himself as a cross between Jinnah of the 1940s and Ziaul Haq of the 1980s. So basically, he's promoting a regressive jihadi kind of ideology, and again positioning the Pakistan army as a defender of not just the physical but also the ideological frontiers of Pakistan and the primary political force, and as the wronged other of India. That, all the definitions that Pakistan ideologically has of itself is with a reference of India. So now my second point. Uh, Pakistan's foundational confusion and hostility has caused a great deal of anger on both sides. And if we look at the sweep of the relationship in the last 3/4 of the century, I found while researching my book is that anger is a constant motif, and it's a recurring motif and a metaphor, in fact, of the bilateral interaction. So there's been anger over partition and its aftermath, the killings, over wars, over conflicts, over acts of terrorism. It's a real and palpable anger. There's also been a layered kind of ire on the part of Pakistan, real or feigned, over the unfulfilled dream of Kashmir, the loss of East Pakistan, and the Siachen Glacier in 1984. Equally, India has been angry over the unprovoked wars, over the terrorism, over the deceit. In 1947, Jinnah was upset and angry at getting what he called a moth-eaten country, a truncated country. He expected all of undivided Punjab and all of undivided Bengal, which had a Muslim majority population, to go to Pakistan. And this perceived loss of territory of Punjab and Bengal led to a foundational culture of a quest for territory. And that made them seek the then princely state of Jammu and Kashmir. And Jinnah sanctioned a jihadi move into Kashmir that led to the first Pakistan war of 47-48. If you look at Ayub Khan, and before each war in 1965, he was angry and he tried to grab Kashmir. I tell the story in my book of the 10th of September, when our then High Commissioner in Pakistan, a man called Keval Singh, is called in at 1:30 in the morning by the Pakistan Foreign Secretary, and a very angry Foreign Secretary whose name was Aziz Khan. He summoned him and shouted at him and said at midnight that this is a treacherous aggression against Pakistan by India. This was the supposed move India had made into Pakistani Punjab. He doesn't refer to the move a month earlier by the Pakistani jihadi groups into Kashmir. And then he says the Hindu fascists in New Delhi should be made to realize that instead of their evil designs to undo Pakistan, this misadventure would lead to their disintegration. So this characterization of rabid Hindu leaders, fascist country, is something that is foundational to the narrative of Pakistan, not something that has been reserved for BJP or Modi. Later in 1971, Yahya Khan and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto were deeply upset with what was happening in East Pakistan, because the Bengalis had the temerity to win the first and only free election that Pakistan had in 1970. They could not bear the thought of Mujib ruling over the Punjabi heartland. So they sanctioned essentially a genocide in East Pakistan, and we know all what happened. It led to the creation of Bangladesh. And Bhutto, again, I was talking of the feigned anger, goes to the UN in the middle of this India-Pakistan war of 71, and he famously tore up the UN resolution which asked for a ceasefire, because he did not want a ceasefire. He wanted the Pakistan army to lose, and on the ash heap of this lost Pakistan army, he built his power, he consolidated power over the ash of the demoralized Pakistan army. So, it was a convenient anger that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto used. Again, in 1999, the most important, perhaps, peace initiative in the history of this relationship, when Vajpayee decides after the nuclear tests of 98 to go into Pakistan to Lahore and sign a Lahore Declaration, hoping to do a strategic reset in this relationship, and accepted by Pakistan civilian leaders, Nawaz Sharif, there's one man who's angry about it, and that is the Army Chief General Musharraf. So he was already by then planning the Kargil adventure, and again, we know what happened. He destabilized that process. In 2025, when Pahalgam happened, there was a very plausible theory that one of the primary drivers was General Asim Munir's anger over what he saw as India's interference in Balochistan. And therefore, he felt that was justified launching an attack on India. So this is, a constant theme, this anger. And in dealing with this policy, it's been a familiar theme that we cannot solve this problem. We cannot resolve this problem, but let's manage it in a calibrated way. So when I had to choose a title for my book, I looked at this anger, I looked at the management, and it sort of playfully combined the two recurring metaphors in this diplomatic relationship to when I talked of describing this relationship. If there's any policy advocacy in the title, it is that the anger management is a call for calm and reason rather than emotive policy choices, particularly on the part of Pakistan, so that you look at long-term interests and not short-term passions. Of course, it helped to have a title like this because I often found the book listed at airports in the management section. And my publisher said, okay, that's good, because if the geopolitical buffs won't read it, maybe the self-help groups might. So that helped as well. Now, the third point here in this hostile relationship is that surprisingly, despite all this hostility, there has been space for diplomacy and peace initiatives in this relationship. India's case, the buck has always stopped with the Indian Prime Minister. So from Nehru to Modi and every Prime Minister in between, they have personally handled this relationship. They have owned it. They've been responsible for it. And they have been responsible for propelling the countries either towards war or peace. For Pakistan, these decisions of war and peace lay with the Pakistan army, with varying degrees of consultation with civilian or regimes. And we often needed the coincidence of strong governments on both sides to make a peace diplomacy initiative effective and to ensure that any significant breakthrough was sustainable. The leaders have often put their personal stamp on the diplomacy. So Nehru was himself the foreign minister of India for for all his tenure, and he was India's chief diplomat all through the 50s. Vajpayee's diplomatic forays into Pakistan defined India's balanced approach, India's sincerity, and Zia was perhaps, Zia-ul Haq, who ran Pakistan in the 80s, was perhaps the most consummate diplomat for Pakistan because he tried to sweet talk India. He visited 5 times on unrequited visits, and while at the same time developing a jihad in Punjab and Kashmir, they called the War of 1,000 Cuts, and running the Afghan jihad successfully for the Americans, and also running a nuclear program very successfully. So it was in an era of relative political stability and confidence in 1960 that Nehru went to Pakistan to sign with Ayub Khan the Indus Waters Treaty. Remember, this was a time when we didn't have the first 1965 war before that. So this was 5 years before that. And also Rajiv Gandhi's attempt at peace with Benazir Bhutto. He there was suddenly a talk of two young leaders born after partition who could suddenly bring a new kind of dynamic to this relationship. But again, they was tripped by an army that was deeply suspicious of Benazir Bhutto. So Vajpayee's visit 99, Modi's visit to Lahore in 2015 were all sort of goodwill visits by confident Indian prime ministers who felt that they should at least spend some political capital in trying to fix this relationship. And but in each case it did not work. And just like it took a Nixon to make a trip to China in 1971, a Republican to make tactical friends with the communists, it has taken politicians from a muscular political party, that is the BJP, to tango with the Pakistan army. That has been a sort of pattern. And some observers argue that any peace initiative would need to be actively owned by the BJP, whether or not it is in power, and has to be actively owned on the other side by the Pakistan army. Changes in government provide occasion to attempt changes in policy. So Vajpayee, has, as a politician, defied this conventional wisdom many times in his career. So in 1978, he was suddenly appointed foreign minister for the first time. He was from the Janata Party, which was supposed to be anti-Pakistan, anti-Muslim, but he was the one who took the initiative to go to Pakistan on a goodwill visit. In 1999, he defied expectations again by going to Lahore. Modi's visit was similarly unexpected in 2015. He just dropped in on Lahore in 2015. And I think what it demonstrated was that India's political instinct is to fix this problem rather than say we fix Pakistan. Can we fix this problem and get on with it? So over the years, we've seen a national policy posture that emerged organically from national objectives. But the diplomats of the day also influenced events apart from the politicians. So in the 1960s, you had a position where Ayub Khan had taken over after a coup. Nehru, the Democrat, was deeply suspicious of him and didn't want to engage. But the then High Commissioner Rajeshwar Dayal goes to Nehru, persuades him that he must give the general a chance. And he kind of helps overcome Nehru's instinctive suspicion of the dictator. It really turns out eventually that Nehru was right, because Ayub Khan launches the 1965 war. Similarly, in the 80s, Natwar Singh, the then High Commissioner, becomes an advocate for Zia. He tries to persuade Mrs. Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, that let's try and do some business with this dictator. He even manages to get a visit, and he used to the Zia, with his diplomacy, used to call him Kuwar Sahib. And he used to be very proud of the fact that he knew the Pakistani dictator very well. But, that was all a superficial posture that Zia had adopted. In 2001, again, I'm just illustrating how diplomats do on the margins play a role. In 2001, Pakistan's envoy Jahangir Qazi, through some very quiet diplomacy with Advani, whom he happened to meet 22 times. So this was the supposedly hardline Home Minister of India, Advani. A Pakistani High Commissioner meets him secretly 22 times. And from that comes the idea of an Agra summit, that can we get Musharraf across. It didn't pan out too well, but again, there was some diplomacy at play. So diplomacy conducted at whatever level, even in a hostile relationship, shapes the trajectory of ties. And to some observers, Indo-Pakistan diplomacy has mostly focused on conflict management rather than conflict resolution. What diplomats are involved in, keeping the larger picture in view, is fighting the fires, managing the furies, rather than in looking for long-term sustainable solutions with good neighborliness. So the nature of diplomacy has also changed. In the initial years, there used to be a great deal of personal cultural intimacy between diplomats on both sides. And this continued till the 1970s. But in later times, it was professionals pitted against each other, which was overall a positive thing. So there has been space for quiet diplomacy, for the traditional and classical secret conversations away from the public glare. But this is reduced in current times because in the age of social media scrutiny, everything needs to be shared real time, particularly in the relationship like India Pakistan. And quiet diplomatic maneuvers become rare, not least because they are harder to pull off. So, more importantly, the public postures of populist politicians, they shrink the space further. And for instance, Imran Khan, when was a populist politician and very active in Pakistan. When I met Imran Khan, he said very positive things about the India-Pakistan relationship. But when Article 370 happened and we took that decision, he painted himself into a corner saying, we will not talk to India until India reverses that position. And he takes a very strong public position that made it very hard for Pakistan. They have, of course, reversed that position now. So there's been a lot of this Punjabi bonhomie in the diplomacy, this what some people call jhappi pappi diplomacy, that you go and speak in Urdu, Punjabi, and so on. But one particular diplomat, Ricky Jaipal, and I quote him in my book, he was from Tamil Nadu, and he said, look, he identified himself as a Madrasi who doesn't speak Punjabi. And the Pakistanis actually respected that because he said, you're not laying claim to us in any way. You're dealing with us like a foreign country. And this is what they prefer to do. In the 78-year relationship, 4 wars, several minor skirmishes, we still find there is room for diplomatic diplomacy, diplomatic creativity. So I've pointed out to several larger than life diplomats in my book. P.N. Haksar was Indira Gandhi's advisor and counsel all through the 1971 war. And he made her look taller, better. He was giving her great advice. Also, 1971 was perhaps the finest hour for not just India's military, but also for India's diplomacy. Because what 3 key diplomats played an important role. Haksar was guiding Mrs. Gandhi in Delhi, guiding her into things like signing the Indo-Soviet Treaty, not being overly concerned about China. There was Brijesh Mishra, who was a diplomat in China. He famously interpreted Mao's smile. Mao smiled at him in 1970, and he could, that was an oversimplification, but he could report that the Chinese will not step into the 1971 war. And there was D.P. Dhar in Moscow, who was working on the India-Soviet treaty. So there was a great deal of scope for diplomacy. Even in current times, my own tenure in Pakistan, 2017 to 19, in case you didn't know, I was booted out of Pakistan. I was expelled finally because of Article 370. But I found that there was space for conversations. And during Pulwama, for instance, I did become a crisis communication channel. I recount the story in my book on the 27th of February, after Pakistan was worried that India would be launching missiles. I get a call at midnight on behalf of Imran Khan from the High Commissioner of Pakistan to India, who was then in Islamabad, saying that my boss wants to speak to your boss. So Imran Khan wanted to speak to Modi on various things. And I checked with my colleagues, and I don't mention in my book who I checked with, and I said, okay, you can, my Prime Minister is not available, give me the message. So the point is that in tough relationships, it is important to have diplomats in place, because you could manage a crisis on the spot. Again, after the crisis of Pulwama and Balakot, I was back in Pakistan and could have some very frank discussions with the Pakistanis on what India's asks were about terrorism, what we'd like them to do, whether we talked about giving us 26 Indian passport holding terrorists that they were sheltering. But these conversations are not easy to have if you don't have diplomats in place. Again, not every policy question gets escalated to a senior political level, and there is a great deal of local creativity that you could use. So one of the issues before I went to Pakistan was, what would be the optics of my meeting with the Pakistan Army Chief? And I was told it won't be great. But my then Foreign Secretary, which happened to be Dr. Jaishankar, told me use local creativity, which is a license to do something short of being photographed with the army chief. So I had various proxies and various conversations. And often the diplomacy in these tough relationships is on both sides. So every 2 months I was coming here, meeting the Indian Prime Minister, giving him some messages, meeting the National Security Advisor, Duval. So diplomacy is important and perhaps even more required in difficult relationships. So, which brings me to the fourth big picture point I wanted to make for you, which is that global forces matter. The global major powers have played an important role in India-Pakistan relations. We often prefer to deal with a lot of issues bilaterally, but global forces have mattered. So South Asia was sometimes a playground for the superpowers, as the US used this every playground in the world to contain what they felt communist China, communist Soviet Union at different points. And, particularly in the 21st century, I think we've seen a major churn and major rethinking on how the major powers want to deal with this area. But major powers are pursuing their global interests, and that impacts us. They will privilege their interests over India's interests, and that we should be clear about. For instance, right at the creation, it was the British national interest that decided the fate of India and Pakistan. Britain was fatigued by the Second World War. Britain saw Pakistan as a country that would be more amenable to pursuing or helping or forwarding British interests in terms of oil, in terms of keeping away the communists, than Nehru's India, which was seen as socialist inclined, and the British were not very sure India would play a major role in keeping the Russians away. So subsequently, in the US and Russia fighting the Cold War, which made them choose partners, the Chinese came into the play in the 1960s. They aligned with their adversary's adversary after 1962 very closely with Pakistan. So what was a strategic alliance of two countries which had a common adversary over a period of time has become a dependence, an abject dependence of Pakistan on the Chinese for their nuclear program, their military program, their air power, and now even their economy. So this is again a situation that we face, and we saw a Sino-Pak battlefield play out for us. Fortunately, we did much better than them, but that is a reality we have to be aware of. Now, the Cold War between the US and Soviet Union has also morphed into a new one in the 21st century in Ukraine. It's become a broader one between Russia and the larger West, and it is accompanied by a new contestation between the US and China. For some scholars, the new era is one of South Asia seeing a revival of what we call big power geopolitics as the US tried to withdraw from the region. Remember, the US was in the region in Afghanistan from 2001, right after 9/11, to 2021 August when it left. But even now, the US sees some benefit of some capacity, and which is why it cultivates Pakistan to get some ability to deal with Afghanistan, and particularly the CENTCOM, which is the Central Command of the US Army, finds it useful to be part of this theater, despite a completely changed relationship with India, which is a strong strategic partnership. China has deepened Pakistan's dependence, and therefore India's concerns of a two-front or a single-front war is very real. But Pakistan also continues to woo the US. It's part of their strategic culture. So leveraging everything from strategic location to cryptocurrency to mining rights, and hence you saw this month the field marshal's lunch at the White House with a very transactional US president. Now, for military experts, the other issue that has changed is the power differential between India and Pakistan. This has widened and will continue to do so. And when the military differential widens, what does Pakistan do? It looks for external alliances in order to strengthen itself, because it feels it's more vulnerable to, and also it becomes it will use either sub-conventional means like terrorism, but it will also look for global partners to match India's strength, which in GDP terms is now more than 10 times Pakistan's. So when we're talking of foreign forces, the multilateral bodies have also played a major role. Aside from the major powers, the UN has tried since its inception to facilitate the India-Pakistan territorial issue. Just as the World Bank mediated the waters, and this is now being contested by India. We do say since 1971, since the Shimla Agreement, that we have moved strategically to a space of bilateralism. We will deal with Pakistan directly, and we don't want either mediation or bodies, but there is a certain degree of flexibility here. India will continue to use bodies like UN Security Council, the Human Rights Council when necessary. India will not shy away. And after being wary of internationalizing, quote unquote, the Kashmir issue because of years of propaganda by Pakistan, what India is showing is now confidence and flexibility in approaching, say, the International Court of Justice for imprisoned citizens, or the Financial Action Task Force for putting the pressure on Pakistan on terrorism, the Civil Aviation Organization ICAO for aviation disputes, and now India will probably engage with the World Bank to amend the Indus Waters Treaty, which will be part of the new normal. So traditional multilateral instruments like the IMF and newer ones like the Financial Action Task Force will be able to put more intense scrutiny on Pakistan, modify its behavior in different ways. And my view would be that, in a sense, India should not be too concerned if Pakistan gets integrated into Western structures, because there is a certain Western leverage then on Pakistan, vis-a-vis a situation that it becomes a complete vassal state of the Chinese, a complete dependent state on the Chinese, gets isolated from the world. So there is some way of modifying the behavior. Which brings me to the fifth and final theme, which is that our policy towards Pakistan now, for the last few decades, is fundamentally a counterterrorism policy. And that is because after the proxy warfare of the 1980s and Kashmir in the 1990s, the hope was that Pakistan would not try to assert sub-conventional superiority when it gained nuclear parity in 1998. So if your your primary concern is that I want to be India's equal, you've got that parity in the nuclear domain because you've got those weapons of deterrence. But the opposite happens after 98. In 99, we get Kargil. In 2001, we have terrorism in our parliament. So what happens is that Pakistan attempts this territorial revisionism in Kargil and subconventional warfare under the nuclear umbrella. And subsequently, in nuclear times, we've seen spectacular acts of terrorism, 2001, 2008 Mumbai, 2016 Uri, 2019 Pulwama, and now 2025. We've seen this again play out in Pahalgam. But what it has done is made the India-Pakistan relationship heavily securitized, not just because of the four major conflicts, but because of the everyday unfolding ones. And again, this is something where we have the relative importance of themes like ideology, territory, security, but now Pakistan's quest for security by portraying India as a dangerous neighbor which can attack it, and this is what the Pakistan army would like to tell its people, and India's own lowered threshold of terrorism makes this a very securitized relationship, which means that bilateral diplomacy will keep security issues at the center of the grand strategy that the two countries will have for each other. So both countries accept that security is the dominant concern, and therefore what we've seen is that terrorism in the last 3 decades has derailed the détente processes. Many in India believe that Pakistan should now be approached, and I am one of those, with a policy of active defense to counter terrorism. So India's Pakistan policy has to be a counter-terrorism policy rather than a policy, say, for the rest of South Asia, which is neighborhood first. And the acts of terror over the decades, particularly in the 21st century, have each time set the dialogue as and when it was taking place back by a few months. And this is often, the acts of terrorism were often timed to major meetings between the two, meetings between Vajpayee and Nawaz Sharif, for instance, and Modi and Nawaz Sharif, which becomes an additional disincentive for India's politicians. Why should I go to Pakistan and attempt a grand reset if what I'm going to get in return is possibly a higher probability of a huge terrorist attack? So again, this is something particularly true because now the distinction in India's mind between a Pakistan-based terrorist group and the army has gone away. So this is again what we have, a situation where we have terrorism as a central point in the conversation. And again, more importantly, and this will be my last point, what we have is that the strategic restraint that India had exercised after the nuclear, after going nuclear in Kargil in 99, in 2001, after the parliament attack, it's replaced now by a more sophisticated counter-terror and active defense policy. I would make the counterfactual argument that if we had used this kind of military power in the 80s in Punjab, in the 90s after Kashmir, in the 2000s after the various attacks, we could have deterred some of the violence that we faced. So a Balakot or Sindoor-like strike after Mumbai would have prevented perhaps more attacks subsequently and would have at least put a high cost to Pakistan for this behavior, to the Pakistan army for this behavior, if not acted as a deterrent. So what I have tried to present to you is what, in my view, are the 5 key issues, an identity crisis in Pakistan that inflames the relationship, even though diplomacy and external powers play a role, but Now the key deal breaker in the relationship is terrorism, and the relationship cannot really progress in a positive direction until this is handled squarely. So, which brings us to the final question, that can the future be different from the past, or how can it be different from the past? I'm going to skip some of the detailed ideas, but just end by saying that this relationship has seen a lot of disruptions. It's seen anger, it's seen diplomacy, it's seen disruption, and it has also seen several moments of hope. So it's not a relationship that can be solved or resolved with one magic bullet, one summit, one handshake. It must be managed patiently, firmly, strategically. Diplomacy still matters. So does deterrence. And so does clarity. We need to be clear about our objectives. We do not want to solve the Pakistan problem once and for all. What we want is for Pakistan to stop being revisionist, stop exporting terrorism to India, and that would be our limited objective. And perhaps what we can best aim for is managed hostility, and in time, cold peace. And so I would say the way to deal with Pakistan is through strategic patience and through military strength. It's not a choice between the alternative options of deterrence, containment, or engagement, but it's a combination of all three. Let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, sir, for a very profound discourse on the subject. He has gone into the nuts and bolts of a long problem besetting our country for the last almost 80 years now. When Mr. Sudesh asked me to be here today, the first thing I did was to go out and buy this book. And I must say, without any reservation, that I find it absolutely enthralling book. Every page is thrilling. The title itself is, as I was mentioning to him, quite cheeky. And it brings up an image of the grappling that we do with our neighbor country. I must also congratulate him for the deep dive he has done into research and taking out old records and bringing it out. And as a writer, I would like to compliment him about the command he has over the English language and the way he writes. Each sentence is very beautifully crafted. And before I ask certain questions to him, I want to put in a few personal thoughts. And I was trying to find some resonance with the book in my own career. Some of you may know that I've been in Rajasthan for about 37 years of my active career. We are a border state. We have about 200 kilometers of border with Pakistan. And throughout the ups and downs of this long journey, we could always feel the menace of a threatening neighbor next to us. I had the good fortune to spend 2 years as district collector in a border district called Badmer, which has about, I think, 100 kilometers of common boundary, at a time when there was no fence. When you travel from north to south with your border security service officers, we could look across just 100 feet away, Pakistan. And we used to wave to the Pakistani rangers on the other side, and they used to wave back. There were times when we used to exchange gifts during Diwali and other occasions. That was the practice that was going on. But I also remember very somber and sorrowful atmosphere when in 1999, the bodies of the slain Indian Jawans after Kargil were brought into Rajasthan. More than 100 of them belonged to Rajasthan. And they were dispatched mostly to the rural areas of Rajasthan, where we ensured that their final rites were carried out with utmost dignity and empathy. And then to follow up with a package of compensation and rehabilitation, which it was our duty to give to them. So these are just certain personal comments, and now I'll go into some of the questions which came to my mind as I was reading this book. Even with the last conflict we had a month ago, when you listen to interviews in foreign channels, one of the persistent questions that keeps coming up is why are we not implementing the 1948 United Nations Security Council resolution? And it is a complaint against India, just as much as we have a complaint against Pakistan. Maybe you'd like to just tell us what this whole issue is and why we are reluctant to go down that path.
Sure. So I think that's, but you mentioned Barmer, and let me just tell you a little story again of the diplomacy. When I was in Pakistan, I got a call from the MP from that region, Manvendra Singh. And he said that, there were cross-border marriages and marriage parties. So a group had gone and they have a confidence-building measure, a train called the Thar Express, which goes across from the Indian side, and it goes once a week. And this marriage party had gone, and some older person, a lady, had passed away. And they wanted to bring the body back. They didn't have the money to go all the way to north to Punjab and so on. And this border crossing was 6 days away. They didn't have the resources to even kind of freeze or put the body in refrigeration. And they said, can you help us get the body back through that? And it was an impossible ask because it had never been done. But we said, we'll just take a chance. So we called up various people and said it's a humanitarian gesture. We called a few Pakistani journalists also and said, can you push this through the system? And by some miracle, the Pakistanis actually did it. In 2 days, they sent the border officials on a day when the train wasn't supposed to go, opened it, let a car travel, and they allowed this to come. So, there are strong linkages. This is a more benign border, but in better times, there have been relationships between the two sides, which have been quite positive. But coming to your question of 1948, I think that's a question that has hounded this relationship for decades. From India's point of view, the 1948 resolutions have in any case become infructuous after 1972, the Shimla Agreement, which was talking of the principle of bilateralism over multilateralism in dealing with this issue. So if you see the history politically, in 1947-48 war happens, India goes to the United Nations and asks for a resolution to stop the war. That's what brings the ceasefire. In 1965, when we have another war, we go to Tashkent, and the Soviet Union steps in. Of course, our Prime Minister dies there in 1966. But in 1971, we take the view that now we've won this war decisively, and therefore we will get Pakistan to agree on a principle of bilateralism. Let it not talk of the principle of multilateralism and UN resolutions anymore. And we take that position that 1972 Shimla overrides everything else that came before it. Also, I think what happens from Pakistan seems to be agreeing to this, but Bhutto makes a plea and they add in that without prejudice to positions. So, Pakistan takes the plea that their original position is that the UN resolutions are still valid. And the technical position is that the UN resolutions do not lapse until there's another resolution making them lapse. So this is the technical position. But the other finer point there is that even the resolutions of 48, the three critical resolutions, talk of three things sequentially.
Yeah.
First, Pakistan's withdrawal from the piece of land it had occupied what we call POK. Then both sides whittling down the number of troops. And the third step was to be a plebiscite. And what India said is the first step was never taken. Pakistan never withdrew its troops. India went to the UN under Chapter 6 to say that please ask the Pakistani troops to withdraw from Indian land. So I think that is the position we take. Pakistan makes a huge propaganda point in every forum of talking of the UN resolutions. But both the Shimla Agreement and the Lahore Resolution of 99 were designed and agreed to put UN behind us and agree on bilateralism.
I asked this question because only a week ago, this was again raised by the Pakistani ambassador in the US, I think.
It's a standard talking point.
Okay.
It'll always come up.
The second issue is you have yourself been a prophet for track 2. That is track 2 meaning that people-to-people contact, think of the common history, common language, poetry, drama, all that we have share, including cricket and hockey and Bollywood and so on. But there is another view that these are just frivolous talk. The only solution can come with hard diplomacy or even swift military action. So there are the hawks and the doves which argue constantly on the way forward. What is your view on these two opposing thoughts?
So I would make a distinction there. And, as I mentioned, there's what I advocate is a twin track approach, that we have to be completely tough using every bit of military power on terrorism, both to establish punishment and establish deterrence and impose costs on the army. So there's no question about that. But we need to have calibrated engagement. I'm more in favor of calibrated engagement with the Pakistan army directly to give it some direct, tough messages on what India expects it to do. Now, track 2, what you're referring to is also people-to-people connections, which is fine. There is a certain constituency. But what we must remember is that in Pakistan, unlike in India, which is a democracy, the people's will is not reflected. The 98% of the people hate the army. They feel they voted in the last election in 24 April for Imran Khan. And if it wasn't an election that was rigged, Imran Khan would have won with a 2/3 majority. But the army decides to put Imran Khan in jail, get the Sharif brothers out of exile and give them power. So the people-to-people conversation, even if there is assuming a lot of goodwill between the peoples, it is not expressed into policy. Pakistan will still launch a Pahalgam, regardless of whether the people love each other. But track 2 is a different game. Track 2, which I am part of, are some conversations which are deniable, but with no government in that space. There's a track 1.5, which may have government as well as strategic community in the room having a conversation. Track 2 is no government in the room, but people involved in the relationship who may be retired generals, retired security experts, and others may be part of that conversation. And that becomes an additional channel to do a temperature check on the other side and even give messages to the governments on what the other side is thinking when the track 1 conversations are closed. So in any difficult relationship, there's space for track 2 because you have conversations without the governments getting into direct negotiations. We did this with Canada, for instance, and got excellent results. The relationship is back on track in some of the ideas came up in track 2. So I think we also need to make a distinction between track 2 as in quiet conversations between strategic communities and people-to-people conversations.
Your personal view, I'm just tapping your personal view. Do you think this problem is at all solvable without addressing the Kashmir issue? Because both the countries are very, very strong. They have their own viewpoints. do we not finally have to address this issue, to whatever extent it may go, to have some kind of a peace in the future, in the long range future? Ultimately, that issue has to be addressed.
Right. I would accept that the issue has to be addressed. I would also accept, but also caution that even if the issue was miraculously addressed and solved, the problem wouldn't go away because there are other problems of parity, which we've discussed, the two-nation theory, supposedly, which Pakistan's army perpetuates itself based on an exaggerated threat for India. So if it miraculously got Kashmir, it would still not be enough for the army. It would need to be doing other stuff. But what we also need to recognize is that Kashmir itself has traveled. So after 2019, we have a position where the peace dividend is now available to India. And the Kashmir conversation for India is an internal conversation. The conversation with Pakistan is a foreign policy conversation on perhaps the borders, which India could have just as it could with China. But I don't think there is any room now for a position as Pakistan wants it. It says that Indians, Pakistanis, and Kashmiris should be negotiating this issue. Those days are gone. It is India and Pakistan could discuss in the future. But for India, that is subject to conditions that terror and talks will not go together.
So since you have been in diplomacy over the last 35 odd years, I wanted to know your views on whether you see a transformation post 2014 when Narendra Modi came into power. Is there a clear distinction before and after? Because people tell us that he is more decisive, even more aggressive, more muscular. Directions are clear. Do you, as a diplomat, see that difference before 2014 and post 2014?
I would say that there has been an evolution of India's diplomacy over right from the 90s. The world itself is changing. So I would say it was a bipolar world till 1990. It became multipolar. It became unipolar from 1990 to about 2008. And what Modi is experiencing is a world which is multipolar. It requires more agility, more flexibility, and perhaps tougher positions. Also, India's national comprehensive power has gone up. So India's ability to make those, have those conversations has gone up as the soon-to-be third largest power. So I think the national, comprehensive national power has gone up. That will inform the way the government will behave and the way the world has changed. It's become a much more, uncertain sort of world. But more than that, I think the foreign policy that we practice has been professional. It has helped that Modi has had a professional foreign minister for several years who's guided him along. But I think India has reacted to issues much better than most other countries. So in a sense, India is not only being muscular, it is punching above its weight.
So for example, the crossing the border to give a response, probably it began with Modi's time, or was it there earlier?
Absolutely. A stated policy of crossing the border came with this government really from 2016. So 2016, Uri was the first time, 2019, so ground strikes, air strikes in Balakot, and now Operation Sindoor. So there is a certain, strong message of deterrence that goes to Pakistan, but also the cost has gone up for Pakistan to do any such action.
In the last chapter of your book, which I was finishing today, you mentioned two phrases which I found very interesting. One, from the Pakistan side, you talk of the primacy of geoeconomics. And from the Indian side, you talk of rising power differential. You have already mentioned it in your speech. Could you just give us a little bit more explanation about what you mean?
Sure. I think these are two very important ideas. Geoeconomics was an idea that came up during the last army chief's tenure. Imran Khan and the army chief were talking of the primacy of geoeconomics over geopolitics. If I translate it, it means from Pakistan's point of view, our economy is crumbling, we are screwed. So let's talk about the economy rather than talking about the political issues or talking about taking ideology forward. But all that, which was a positive kind of move forward over the 6 years of General Bajwa's tenure, at least in terms of rhetoric, has been reversed by the current Field Marshal Asim Munir, because he has regressed Pakistan back to a culture instead of geoeconomics of jihadism. So I, in one of my pieces, said from geoeconomics to jihadism, because he's again harking back to two-nation theory, Kashmir being the jugular vein, and taking Pakistan to an ideology-based position where it has to fight India, rather than into a position where it should be working with its partners to improve its economy. And the other question you mentioned, I think that's significant in any relationship between nations, the power differential. $300 billion, $320 billion Pakistan's GDP versus $4 trillion. So there's a 10 to 11 to 12x difference in GDP, in military capacity, in national capacity. Operation Sindoor, we saw the differential in military capacity. Pakistan didn't have either the defense or the offensive capacities to counter India. And that is important in any kind of warfare or in any kind of equation between the two countries. But Pakistan's quest for parity ideologically is so strong that it will try to ignore that. And, just as India is conscious of the power differential with China, it's a $4 trillion versus a $19 trillion economy. So we know there is a power differential. We'll factor it in dealing with the Chinese, apart from the $130 billion of bilateral trade and dependency. But I think what Pakistan needs to do is to factor in this power differential in order to change its behavior on the jihadism, which it refuses to surrender.
Now, my very last question, on a personal note. In your book, I did not find any reference to how your family was going through all this crisis with you. How did you balance your work with your family and your personal time?
Well, my wife was in and out of Pakistan. She was there and she thought it was a big adventure. So I think that was the general way of looking at it. Also, I think Pakistan is full of paradoxes. So there could be hostility during the day, but there are strong friendships in the evening. So Pakistanis are very hospitable, they are very friendly. And once you're there, you also factor in that, there is a ruling sort of elite which has the hostility to India, but that's not shared by large sections of the population. So it's a bit of a dangerous game being a diplomat in Pakistan, because there could be incidents, and particularly if there's conflict, there could be immediate repercussions. But at a personal level, it is fascinating, and it's like going to another country that is at an angle to yourself, because it's almost the same, culturally the same. There's a great deal of commonality in culture, in music, in cuisine, but yet again, these fundamental differences.
Let me thank you once more for this very engaging discussion we had.
Thank you.
And we hope we can continue this discussion in the future as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.